Please welcome producer Michelle Graham, writer Charles Randolph, and director Jay Roach. Let's do Michelle and you, and then Jay.
Thank you.
Welcome, guys.
Thank you very much. Wow. That's
Yeah,
such a nice reception. Thank you.
Michelle, I'm going to start with you. One of the powerful things about this film is that despite the divisiveness in our country, you do not let the politics overtake the story of the film. Can you tell us about that?
I mean, that was one of the really important things for all of us, is to separate the politics from the human story. Sexual harassment is not political. People should not be harassed at work, and I think that's something that everybody on the whole political spectrum can agree on. And so we went into this movie knowing that while certain people and audience members and even participants in the film may not agree with certain political ideologies of some of the people that we represent in the movie, they can still empathize with them and still go along with them on their journey and know that sexual harassment just isn't acceptable and shouldn't be stood for.
But there is, yes. But there's something almost surreal and absurd that the first strike versus the long history of sexual harassment took place of all places in the Fox News.
It was an unlikely place and unlikely people to take him on. And one of the things is that, as we say in the movie, Roger isolated all the women. He kept them apart. He pitted them against each other and made them compete with each other in a way that they didn't feel comfortable sharing their stories. This is a year before Harvey Weinstein, and people didn't feel comfortable necessarily at places like that to come forward and tell their truth and report something like this. And so things are starting to change, and we hope that this movie is going to be part of that conversation to help propel us forward as a society and get those conversations to continue forward.
Which is actually, I want to emphasize the point that you make that these competitive women, they append the attempt to fight against each other. Instead, they rally together to fight the structure. It's a pretty powerful statement. Charles, why so many different narrators? Why the...
Oh, and it's half now than it was originally when on my first draft. I think there were 8 women talking to us at one point, including Prudence Murdoch, who is the oldest of Rupert's daughters, who you weren't allowed to see, as she said, because Rupert never let her in the business. So you only heard from her and you never saw her. That was one of the things we did originally. But it was about trying to capture just a plethora of voices and to sort of establish this thing as an examination of a problem that transcends politics and transcends often people's role in an institution. That women across the entire institution, from people relatively young and starting out to people who were extremely established, had to deal with this kind of bullshit. So that was really the hope, is that give that sense of the breadth of the problem.
I don't want to put words in your mouth, but at least from my point of view, what I greatly admire the way you organize the characters is that Megan becomes the narrative center of the story. Then you have Kayla be the emotional aspect of the film, and then you have Gretchen, the sort of moral compass. Can you tell us about structuring those 3 characters?
Yeah, that's exactly what you've articulated exactly. That they feel different narrative roles, and that they all had very unique and powerful internal conflicts. Megan's the perfect illustration of the bystander problem, because she is such a profoundly ambitious human being, and there is nothing really personally to be gained for standing up for the other women, yet she has to make that choice. She's the person who's got to move past it. Hey, I dealt with my stuff. I'm good to go. You ladies do your thing. And yet she has to come back and really think through, as someone who is on television espousing her morality, what she's going to do. And she does so. Kayla, of course, is someone who possesses a kind of strong. We identify with her, pretty profoundly because she's young and she's new, and yet, she herself isn't clear on all her values or even on her own sexuality in some ways. And then Gretchen is the great sort of the difficulty with any person who is a victim of a crime, much less a survivor, is you can fall into earnest passivity in terms of how we portray them. We want to be precious around it a little bit. And what was interesting about all three of these women is we could have fun with them, right? We could really lean into them, in terms of their quirks and their contradictions and their unusualness. We could start to laugh at them a little bit and then laugh with them, and then they can break our hearts. And that, I often feel like part of my job is to get past your defenses because you're discerning and if you can feel the attempts of the screenplay to sort of get you somewhere emotionally, you put up some defenses. And so by choosing such unlikely women in an unlikely environment, the idea was to try and get us to this issue in a way that was more entertaining, in some ways more surprisingly emotional than it would be with stories if we had a clear sense of where it was going and who would play which role.
I've never seen a film where I actually, as a male member, was experiencing what the women were going through. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, this is something I get very emotional about. I think for Jay and I both, the thing we hope most is that we can get a few men to identify with situations that men often are dismissive about. I think men have sometimes an immediate instinct to sort of question, well, yeah, but she went up there voluntarily. Yeah, she still kept. There's this thing that men do where we minimize often the experience of women around these events. And if we can put men in that room, if we can put them inside Kayla's heart and inside her head, we can see how these are situations that can be utterly life-changing and extremely complicated in a way that we don't see from the outside often as men, because we haven't had these. Many of us had not had these experiences. Some have, and so that's our hope: is to get a few men in that room, experiencing what this is like.
And Jay, I'm not ignoring you, but I want to ask another question to Michelle, is that we also see in the movie different forms of harassment. We see casual, we see criminal, the different aspects. Can you tell us about tackling all the different aspects of it?
Well, it was a really difficult task because obviously there are various levels of harassment, not even just sexual harassment that happen in the workplace. And it's not only in places of corporate America. It happens all across America, at McDonald's, at the grocery store, like anywhere people work, they have the potential to be harassed, and it's just not okay. And it was really interesting to look at this within this corporate structure, because a place where you think that the safety guards would be in place worked actually against the women. Like the hotline, there's this scene, where the anonymous hotline where you could call and report something. It actually then was a feeder up to Roger, and he learned, who was reporting on him, and you could be attacked that way. So there was no real place for women to feel safe, and that was really important for us to portray that everything could just fall out from under them, and there was no real place of safety, and we extended that onto the environment of our set. We really wanted to make sure that we focused on, this is what this movie is about. We know it's extremely triggering, every single scene, especially certain scenes where sexual harassment were being portrayed, could trigger various people on set. We had a lot of women on set and men on set, and we wanted to make sure that everybody was aware and open to coming forward and sharing their stories. We had an extensive, way beyond the normal checklist of sexual harassment training you do before a movie. We had a professional a woman come in and do a multi-hour seminar with everybody, telling them this is what is okay, this is not what is not okay. And you found out the nuances we all learned a lot. I thought I knew a lot about sexual harassment. I learned so much on that day. And it was really important for us to create a community where people could come forward and tell their stories. And a lot of girls and women came up to me on set at various times and said, this happened to me, this happened to me. And it was a beautiful connection where we were all able to finally come forward and tell our truths.
Speaking of difficult scenes, Jay, I want you to tell us about the Kayla's audition with Roger Ailes, which is, I love the choice that you made of tilting the camera to show us her horror, which is actually, it's a powerful directorial choice. Can you tell us about that scene?
That's interesting because there was a time when we thought, are we too close? Should we stay, kind of keep a sort of a distance that would allow you to absorb it with more comfort almost, because it was almost too hard to take when we come up to her face and just see and I tried it and it was just never as powerful. And I was I was in the room actually operating the wide shot camera behind Margot. It shows them sitting apart on the couch, and we shot oppositional camera angles, unlike what you often do, where you shoot one direction, shoot the other direction. And it was very important to me that the actors knew they were always on camera. These would be incredibly difficult, awkward situations, and the awkwardness is the point, right? And so I didn't even know exactly what her shot looked like until I watched it on playback and then got in the cutting room, and it's devastating when you come up and realize you think she's being asked something disturbing, but you have no idea what a soul-crushing thing it is to realize that she came to this office, began to trust him, was sort of performing for him in a certain way to prove that she was ready to go on air and be in his sort of stable of news marketeers, because they're really kind of marketing the news as much as just telling the news. And he slowly gets her to go past that line, and you're not even sure when she went past the line. She sort of, tries to curtsy, and then once she realizes that he's gotten her past this point that she never thought she would go, and there's no going back, and now they have this dark, weird relationship that's based on the secrecy and the humiliation itself, and it's more about power than sexuality. He's gotten her to a place of total powerlessness at that moment, because now she's not in charge of herself anymore even. That's the whole idea of it, because from then on he can get her to go further and further and further, and it's a bizarre form of manipulation that I think happens quite a bit. We see the patterns there. It's actually kind of amazing how similar the patterns are from all the stories that have been reported since. But when that you hit on the moment, I think, when men have talked with us about it afterwards, where they just say, I thought I understood what that might be like, and once I saw that moment and on her face, I understood true humiliation, the weird mixture of shame, even though she's the victim that she talks about when she calls Kate McKinnon later on the phone. I don't think men understand that generally, and I think that's a true moment of empathy that we really, it was in the script. It was Charles wrote it like that, so it was always part of his amazing design for that scene as well.
Charles, Gretchen is based on true story, person, of course, and Megyn Kelly. Kayla is a composite, or
Composite, yeah.
And why did you decide to make
a few reasons. It's such a good question. I think the first one is Kayla is someone who finds herself entrapped in a quid pro quo sexual relationship, and that is that is not someone who's often confident saying "me too," right? And so those are people who don't want to be public, and want to talk to you privately and not publicly. So we are obviously not going to out people. So there's that component of it, but also, it was about trying to find a character that we could just emotionally engage with in a surprising way, and she needed to fulfill a few
sort of quirky roles that were hard to find a real person who actually fulfilled those roles. And lines like I see myself as an influencer in the Jesus space are not things that a lot of real people have said. And so I wanted to sort of have her embody a certain kind of Southern woman that that's more based on my family maybe than I come from an evangelical family. So that's a world that I know pretty well. So it fulfilled. There's quite a few little different things. But in terms of her relationship, her sex. I'm rambling. I'm just rambling away. Sorry.
Oh, you're not. It's very interesting.
In terms of her very specific sexual relationship with Roger, that's based on 3 women. Basically, that's what I would say. So the things that happen in that room, they're very definite patterning to his sexuality and his desire to sexualize his power. That's based on very specific employees of Fox.
You also, the aspect of her being an evangelical millennial is something rare that we haven't seen in cinema, and you don't make fun of that character of that as well. Can you?
No, absolutely not. No, my parents. Were missionaries. My father ran a nonprofit his entire life. He ran a nonprofit. He kept his salary quite low. It was a nonprofit that sort of published Bibles around the world at a lower grade level. And then he took 20-30% of his income that he made from that nonprofit, and he started a series with my mother of orphanages in India. So these are people who not only have a life of service, but they've done this other thing where they go off. They're people with more integrity and generosity you will not meet. Yet they voted for Trump. Right? And so they're completely different in their worldview than I am. And I wanted to do a character in a film that they can identify with, that they could see themselves in, right? Because this is an issue that I want them to understand with people that they know. And so part of it was just trying to say, what is a human being that really can maybe transcend a little bit of the way we've politicized so many of these issues, and show that this particular one especially is worthy of us stepping outside of our ideological boxes.
Jay, your stylistic choices, the multi-camera, there is a kinetic aspect to the filmmaking. Can you tell us about that choice, and also breaking the fourth wall?
Well, the style of filmmaking was a lot derived from me, ironically, having studied how Barry Ackroyd has shot films for many years. I've been sort of stealing his style for Recount and Game Change, and I was very aware of it. We watched Bloody Sunday and the Paul Greengrass movies and a number of other films that I admired of Barry's. And to get, we had someone else that was going to be the DP, and Barry stepped in at the last minute, and I felt so lucky to collaborate with him and find this style that, the way I've always described it, is that he finds a way to make the camera feel like he's a documentarian, but it's almost like the camera didn't get the primary position that was sort of the stagey setup. It got the one next to that one. It was the one that was the fly on the wall thing.
The camera seems to be reacting to the action, and
Absolutely.
that makes it super exciting.
The perfect example, it's very well observed, because the perfect example is the elevator scene, which became the teaser trailer. It's the first time and the only time in the movie all 3 women are together. And even though it's in a box, we shot the front shot separately, but all the rest of the coverage, we pulled little panels out of the elevator door walls, and Barry he watched the rehearsal once. I often filmed the rehearsal. I actually think one of those little pieces is from the filmed part of the rehearsal. But then he figures out this sort of tension in the performances. He's not shooting for how it's going to be edited. He's shooting for how it's going to come to him through his lens. And there's an amazing shot over Margot, who's in the foreground, to Charlize, where the camera it starts on Margot breathing, and then it pans over to Charlize just as she turns, then it comes back to Margot, holds both of them, and he's doing zooming, focus pulls, and reframing with no rehearsal of that. Like that never happened ever in any other take exactly like that. And that spontaneity that comes purely from what he senses the actors are either doing or about to do. It's almost like he can look ahead and see where their attention is going to go. Just gives it a more subjective witness kind of point of view. You feel like you're almost nervous about whether you're going to be in the right place, and then you're almost it's almost tense that you are, oh my God, I'm exactly in the right place and I'm feeling every single thing this person is going through.
And his usage and your usage of zoom lenses, I love, because that's the way the human brain works, where you like zero in on what you find particularly interesting.
I love zooms. I mean, I grew up in the 70s where, using a zoom was not, there was a time though, I won't reveal which comedy I worked on, where I had a shot lined up.
Come on.
Someone was staged in an elaborate set piece coming towards the camera in the middle of some stuff, and the director, and I said, okay, and then right here, just bury the zoom, hide the fact that you're changing focal length in this move. And he said, zoom, we only use primes. Prime lens is fixed focal length, no zooms. And I said, why? He goes, well, zooms are so TV. And I was like, oh. I'm just hard. So I said, okay, let's shoot it like that anyway and see how it goes. And it was such a big part. So it's so great that you said it that way, because to me, your brain is always selecting, it's isolating, you're editing with your own perception by what field of view you choose to see the world through at that moment. Sometimes when something's really far away, but it's incredibly compelling, you're like on a 500 millimeter lens in your brain. Sometimes like you just can't believe everything's happening in this much of a wide view, and you're on a 14 millimeters. So for me, I love the way you put that. It's very much more subjective to me than a fixed box of lenses.
And Charles, speaking of the elevator scene, the fact that that's the only time that we have your three main characters together, and it's
Right.
a worldless scene. It at the same time is so impactful to
Almost no dialogue.
no dialogue. It's worldless. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's about a page of the script, so it's actually it's longer than you think it is, right? But yeah, the idea was just to establish these characters, get them into very distinct emotional states, and then have them wordlessly interact from within those emotional states. And then Jade did this beautiful job of adding that level of claustrophobia to it. You can hear that a little bit. There's a little bit of a jail-like quality to the sound, in terms of doors closing and, this entrapment, this feeling of entrapment, this pressure of entrapment.
For what was so powerful to me about that, and it was in the design of it, even in the script, but that they're in a box. They are alone. There's nobody else who can observe them or punish them, for anything they do wrong. And still, they can't talk to each other. They're each experiencing the harassment of this man. They're each going through their own private hell, and none feels confident enough to talk to the other and share a story that could liberate all of them together. They could walk out of that and just go kick his ass, But instead, they don't. They're so convinced by his sort of culty mythology that any could replace the other, any could sabotage the other, and they are taught that they must keep their own secrets, and that's how he keeps them from uniting against him.
Also, let's just only say briefly, the architecture of that building is fascinating because power is represented in the architecture. And the way that just to get to the second floor, that's such a big deal in some ways. So there's this thing of once you've worked in an office, like the way the elevator is the device that allows you to transcend power, and you're very much aware of what floors you're allowed to go and who's on what floor. So capturing that, what felt like an important way to show just how much power was vested in the one building.
Michelle, how difficult was it for Charlize to basically deal with the fact that Megan, the character that she's playing, has such controversial aspects that are probably in total opposites from her beliefs?
I can't speak directly for Charlize, but I can say that she has gone on record in saying that she doesn't necessarily have to agree with or believe in the same ideologies as the person that she portrays. And almost more interesting for her to take on somebody who's a more complex character, you know, who has varying levels of goodness, lightness, and darkness to them. And I think that she identified with Megan in terms of the struggle that she took on, and taking down Roger Ailes for sexual harassment was a badass thing. And, you know, that's like a badass thing that she wants to portray. And Charlize is a badass woman. And so I think that she was able to hone in on the things that she could identify with. But I will say, her, in addition to everybody else in the movie, the reason why it resonates so much is because Jay and Charles were able to attract such amazing cast who help bring empathy to these characters, and you're really able to go along with them on their journey, like Margot and Nicole and John Lithgow and Malcolm McDowell and Allison Janney, and like the level of people that we got to join in on this because they all knew that this journey was an important one, just speaks to the quality of the writing and the directing and just the whole thing altogether.
And of those people she's mentioned, by far our favorite was Malcolm McDowell. Because
Who's in the audience
he
today?
happens to be here in the audience.
Hi, Malcolm. There he is in the center. He plays Rupert Murdoch, and he's amazing, and we're so lucky to have him in this movie. Thank you, Malcolm. It's so important when that oh, thank you, man. When he shows up, when Rupert shows up, we needed instant gravitas and complexity and sense of humor too. And when we like Malcolm McDowell wants to play, oh my God, we're in. That's great.
Which actually leads me to my next question, that you have all these famous actors that we all know, but then they're playing this also characters that we know very well, like Megyn Kelly or Roger Ailes, and you use prosthetics. What was the line of how much do we put in and allowing us to see Charlize, to see Nicole, but still adding for them to become somebody else?
It's a great question, and it was something we all talked about all through the process, especially with the actors. And Charlize's story, and each has their own specific they had their own answers to that. But for Charlize, she knew she was going to go really far into getting the accent right, the body language right, the sort of attitude and the feel of what it was, you know, what Megan was like. And she felt like she couldn't then look at herself in the mirror in the makeup trailer and see Charlize Theron. It had to be a totally different transformation. It always makes a director nervous because that means hours of extra time in the makeup chair, possibly losing some shoot time, a lot more money. It's expensive to do that. And the risk that it might interfere with performance, that it actually might be tough to emote through the silicone, you know. And so I'm always, especially in her case, I was like, wow, you look a lot like Megyn Kelly already, do you? And she was so right. Once I saw how it just completely allowed her to lose track of herself, you know, and so much so that in many audiences, you can tell people are wondering, is that archival footage at the beginning? I mean, sophisticated viewers are like, what's going on? And then you hear them start to talk to each other like, I think that's Charlize, you know? And that's I think audiences enjoy the tightrope of that, or whatever the bad metaphor of that is, the additional degree of difficulty of portraying a character with all the layers and all the complexity of what they're up against in their predicament, while also transforming so much that you forget they're there, and when will that come through again. On the other hand, I always am there saying, don't obsess about that, because I also want your heart, your soul, your life force to come through, because the audience, I think, connects to the character through that just as much as they do, can you impersonate someone? And so what's magical is when you get both, you know, and that's why I always we all said to all the actors, we're going to surround you with the most incredible players to be in every scene, and you won't be doing off-camera acting like you may in some other movie. You'll always be on. It'll be like being a stage play with the very best people we could possibly get. To have Kazuhiro do the makeup, who also did, you know, Darkest Hour and is such a wizard and a sculptor. I mean, he's an artist. He keeps retiring from makeup, and I think I can never tell if that's just his trick to make us want him more, but we have to pull him out of retirement on every movie, and that's apparently his thing. So we got him out of retirement again, and he transformed John Lithgow too, so all the characters, Rupert's character is transformed, everybody's transformed, so much so that we had to put a disclaimer. The lawyers got nervous. We actually have to tell you, I don't know if you noticed at the beginning of the movie, the last sentence says, anybody who's not in an archival footage who's the real person is actually portrayed by an actor. Really? You have to be told that? Yeah, I guess so, if we're getting that close to the match in some cases.
And then what's terrific is that Kayla, no prosthetics, but she goes through the most, transformation, the arc, visually.
Well, the makeup design for that was, I don't know if you noticed, her eyelashes just kept getting longer and longer. Yeah.
Costume-wise, also,
She's becoming Anchor Barbie, as Kate McKinnon calls her. But she also is the soul at stake ultimately in the movie. She still could go either way. Everyone else has kind of charted where they're headed, what their destiny is. And some have made incredible risky choices, like the Gretchen Carlson choice costs her career. She never works in broadcasting again after Gretchen Carlson sues Roger Ailes. She's come back and done documentaries, but she never got to be an anchor again. The same with Rudy Bakhtiar at the beginning, whose thoughts you hear. In 2006, she's the rising star, the next Christiane Amanpour, gets harassed, gets fired, never works in broadcasting again. Kayla can go either way. She can stay in and try to figure out her place in this, or she can reject it, and you're feeling that she could go either way. Although it was the beautiful design of the script, we actually, as we saw what Margot was doing, we even edged more of the voiceover towards her and that personal, soulful dilemma by the end of the movie, and it got more and more emotional as we shot the movie. Charles is always right there with me, and we're always talking it through, even in post-production, to figure out how to shape that. And Kayla's shape was sort of changed the most as the post-production went along, once we realized what you're getting at.
Although we should probably also note that Nicole really, it's interesting, the problem with Gretchen is she leaves the movie halfway through, right? She gets fired and she's gone. So what do you do with a character who's actually out of the building now for the last hour of the film? And Nicole always made the point that this is exactly what happens to whistleblowers, is they get removed, and that we couldn't do that for Gretchen. So we actually ended up shooting an extra day where we did that another scene with Nicole, just to make sure that we serviced her story. And that was something that I don't think, as men, Jay and I appreciated quite as much, as much as the women did, and led by Nicole, who said, look, this is important. It's important that, even though it's not serving plot in any way, that we check in with her and we understand fully the stakes of what she's done. And it makes a huge difference for her performance.
It's that scene where she says, I jumped off this cliff and no one's supporting me. That was so, and I can't call Megan because she wouldn't call me because Roger pits us against each other. That scene was a late addition just a few months ago because of Nicole's instinct.
I do have to bring up one of my favorite costume designers of all time, Colleen Atwood. Michelle, tell us about bringing her on board.
When we heard that she was interested, we were like, wait, are you sure that you were calling us back on the right movie? It was obviously a dream. She's so talented. She just honed in exactly for every character. There was no real question. Like, she would be like, okay, this is what I'm thinking, and she was spot on with the design of Megan's costumes, design of, as you guys see, the evolution of Kayla. Her character through her costume was genius in Colleen's design, and also helping John Lithgow find his character as well, not just through Kazu's makeup, but also through the fat suit that she designs, and helping him figure out how to hold his body differently. Like, just working with her was just on another level. We were really lucky.
And last question, the Regina Spektor song, "The Soldier." Can you tell us about that?
I'm so glad you asked me about that. So Regina is an old friend of Susanna. My wife is in the music business. She was in the Bangles, Susanna Hoffs, and she. Thank you. Thank you. She and Regina have known each other for a long time, and I was telling her about the movie actually when I first got the script at a function we were at together, and she's like, "That sounds amazing." And so many months later, I said, I don't know, I just come and watch it. I had some instinct that she might connect to it. And she said, okay, but no strings attached. Sometimes I can come up with something, sometimes I can't. And I showed her the film, and about halfway through, she just lost emotional control. Like, she was really upset, and I don't know, just completely, it was in my house. I don't have a big screen room. I just have a little school screen that I pull up, and this is amazing. So thank you for letting me really finally see it at a real theater. But no, I don't. I just wanted her to see the film. She watched it and was so emotional, and she said, "I'm not sure. I think it's so powerful, and I can barely talk, but we'll talk later." 3 days later, she said, I want to come to your house and play you something. So, cut to my wife and me plugging a splitter into her phone and just listening to the song almost as it was, just bobbing our heads, and both started crying. And I played it for Charles. I've never seen Charles get
I'm
so
an easy
emotional.
mark, though. I'm an easy mark.
It was that she internalized the struggle of a single person, as one little soldier running around the castle, as her lyrics say, trying to, shake up the powerful men who are really cowards, that she got the essence of it in such a rousing song with that really just rousing chorus. And then we had the idea of doing this animated thing for an earlier part of the movie, and we married those images to her song, and I was like, now we know what the film should feel like at the end. One little soldier, running around the castles trying to kick down the walls, and that's Regina. She just, my heart. I get emotional thinking about it, because I didn't know if she would. If you've ever tried to imagine writing a song to fit a movie, the chances of that going right are so tiny, and it usually always goes wrong. And you're nervous because if you don't want to go back to the artist and say, it's kind of cool, thanks for doing that, but it doesn't quite fit. This was the opposite. It just blew our minds, and we're really grateful to her for doing it.
Not only have you done an important film that everybody needs to see, but it's also highly entertaining. Congratulations. And you honor us for being here. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Malcolm.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.